Are you married? Are you engaged? Are you dating? Are you single? Are you happy being single? No matter what stage of life you're in, it's important to understand the traditions that go on at wedding ceremonies and what is actually happening when those traditions are going on, what you're actually celebrating. Whether you're participating in the wedding as the bride or groom, whether you're participating as a friend, as a bridesmaid, as a groomsman, or as just an attendee, it's important to understand what you're doing on that very important day. I've been interested in the wedding industry for a very long time. I've watched countless episodes of Say Yes to the Dress and 4 Weddings, and I've read hundreds of magazines all about weddings. I'm actually now engaged myself, and I'm actually working on planning my own wedding. And I think it's very important to understand that what's going on that day, what I'm planning, and the things I'm paying for, I actually understand what I'm doing. It's kind of silly to go through all those meaningless traditions for no point. So I'm just going to go through a few different traditions of the wedding ceremony or the wedding day, but there are so many more that you could look into. Different traditions at the ceremony, different things at the reception, like throwing the bouquet and the garter. But the things I'm going to go through today are the wedding cake, the wedding ring, and the wedding dress. I think those things are very important in weddings, and they have gotten a little distorted from what they originally were intended to be. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the wedding cake. Wedding cakes these days are a huge display item, or basically an art form almost. They show off the bride and groom's personality, and they have extravagant decorations, and they can be huge. They can be just a couple layers. They can be adorned with flowers, real flowers, or fondant flowers, or anything of the sort. And traditionally, the wedding cake is cut by the bride and groom, and the pictures are taken, and then the guests are actually served a sheet cake from the back. This is definitely a departure from the original wedding cake, and there's been a progression of the wedding cake to how it's been used today. So originally, the tradition of creating a special cake for a wedding started in Roman times. Generally, this cake was a fruit cake that was made and was crumbled over the bride's head to bless her with abundance. It was a tradition called crowning the bride. Julius Caesar brought this wedding tradition to Britain in 54 BC. About 200 years ago, this tradition split into 2 different traditions, things that we might be very familiar with today. The first tradition is throwing the rice or the bubbles or whatever it may be over the bride and groom. A lot of times these days people use sparklers as a way to crown the bride and groom as they're leaving their ceremony. The other tradition is the cutting of the cake. That's the big extravagant cake where they cut it and they feed it to each other, and you don't know if they're going to smash it in each other's face or if they're going to feed it to them nicely. The tradition of cutting the cake and throwing the rice or the bubbles split from that one tradition of the fruit cake. The tradition of cake cutting developed in the 1930s when grooms had to help their brides cut the cake because they couldn't get through the thick fondant by themselves. The 3-tiered cake became popular to symbolize 3 important things: the engagement, the wedding, and the eternity rings. And I actually have a cake book here, a cake decorating book, that talks about different ways to decorate cakes, and it actually has a whole section on wedding cakes. And I've just marked one cake. This is a very simple cake compared to what a lot of cakes are today. But here's a simple 3-tiered wedding cake that symbolizes the engagement, wedding, and eternity rings. So the second tradition I'm going to talk about is the engagement ring. A lot of people understand that the engagement ring is a circle and it means eternity. And a lot of people know that that's what that means these days. But I think the tradition can get lost in the fancy diamonds and how much does it cost and how many carats, color, cut, and clarity, and all that silliness that things people place such an importance on today that really were meaningless back then. It was just back when the tradition started. It was a symbol. It meant something. It was important. So the wedding ring started as a symbol for eternity because it's a circle that never ends. The pharaohs in Egypt were the first to believe that the circle was a symbol of eternity. They used rings as a sign of the marriage contract, and it wasn't widespread until Roman times. The development of the wedding ring into gold and silver rings adorned with diamonds is a relatively recent development. Originally, the rings were made of iron. Think about that. These days, rings like this, silver and diamonds, and I mean, I'm not complaining, but it's definitely not an iron ring. In medieval times, gems were added for different meanings. And there's actually a reason that the ring is worn on the fourth finger of the left hand. It's not just a randomly chosen finger. Some people think it's just because it's the ring finger. Well, it's the ring finger for a reason. The Egyptians believed that the vein of love ran directly from the heart to the tip of the fourth finger on your left hand. That is why the symbol of eternity is worn on that finger. Some people believe the tradition of the engagement ring and the wedding band has been around forever, but the development of the wedding band is relatively recent. The idea of the wedding bands for men and women didn't catch on until the 1940s. Dual ring ceremonies became popular in the United States during World War II, when lonely soldiers needed a reminder of their loved ones at home. Though many understand the circle of the wedding ring as to mean eternity, many are unaware of the importance of dual ring ceremonies and even the finger on which the ring is worn. It's important to understand those things are such an important part of the symbol of marriage. The wedding dress is another one of those traditions that has gone completely out of control in this generation. Some believe that it's traditional for a wedding dress to be white. That's generally what most people think, because white symbolizes purity. But many would be surprised to learn that traditional wedding gowns were not actually white. White wedding attire was traditionally only worn by royalty. The average middle-class brides would wear different color wedding attire for different meanings. Things like black was worn for widowers, red was worn to invoke fertility, blue was worn for truth and purity, gray was modest and useful for practical use, and even brown was worn as just a practical option, something you can wear again. White dresses were too impractical and expensive for brides to splurge on to just wear it for one day. That's definitely a departure from what our tradition is today. You can look at just examples like this, a wedding magazine full of pictures of dresses and honeymoons, and this is just one magazine, Brides Magazine. Here are two more Brides magazines. There are many more different magazine publishers also, like Wedding Star, Styles of Wedding Gowns, Southern Living Weddings, Style Weddings, The Bridal Guide, Martha Stewart Weddings. They even have wedding magazines based on location. Here I have New York and Chicago. And then, of course, there's The Knot with all the lookbooks. This one magazine has hundreds of pictures of dresses. It's an amazing departure from what the tradition used to be, a dress that you could wear again. Today, wedding dresses are expensive, and you can only wear them really for one day. The tradition with white wedding attire started with royalty in 1406. Wedding dresses caught on after Queen Victoria's wedding in 1940. The wedding dress today has evolved into something it was intended to be. And while I can't complain, I love the dresses in these magazines. They're beautiful. I love looking at them. Say Yes to the Dress. I love watching shows like that. I think it's important to believe or to remember while we're buying these dresses where the tradition came from and that we shouldn't get out of control with how crazy we are and what we're spending, and we should really remember the main point is just to look nice on your special day. Whether or not you're married, looking to be married, or just enjoying being single, it's important to understand the purpose behind all these important traditions. When we lose sight of the purpose of traditions that we're performing, we're just participating in meaningless rituals for the sake of society. Coming to an understanding of some of these essential traditions is a good start, but there's so much more to learn. There's so many different parts of a wedding that I haven't even gotten into. It's important whether you're just attending the wedding or whether you're actually in the wedding to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. So the next time you're attending a wedding, or look back on your own, or starting to plan your wedding, give a second thought to the reason why each activity is being performed. Thank you.